defense counsel and both assistant state attorneys. State, you ready?
Yes, Your Honor.
Defense?
Yes, sir.
Okay, bring them out. Please be seated. I'll ask our jurors again, did you follow my instructions, not talk about the case among yourselves or with anybody else, or look up any of the people or places involved? Even if you did so inadvertently, now would be the time to raise your hand and let me know. For the record, no jurors lifted their hand. Next witness.
State calls Sherri Fentress. And Madam Clerk, if I could please get your assistance with 58D David and 94.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Can you please state your full name for the record?
Yes, my name is Sherri Fentress.
And Ms. Fentress, where are you employed?
I'm employed with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, or the FBI laboratory in Quantico, Virginia, and I am in the DNA casework unit.
And what do you do in the DNA casework unit?
In the DNA casework unit, I'm a biologist forensic examiner. When I receive or when I am assigned a case, I'm responsible for reviewing that submission to determine what items of evidence need to be tested and what the best course of testing is for those items. I then coordinate the laboratory processing of the items that are being tested. When the laboratory processing is complete, I will review the data that is produced to determine what the conclusions are. I will generate a report with those conclusions and then testify to that report as necessary.
What kind of DNA testing do you do?
I do what's called mitochondrial DNA testing, and that is one of the types of DNA that can be tested for forensic purposes.
And you prepared a presentation for the jury to explain to them what DNA is?
Yes, I did.
And we'll get to that. Let me ask you a few more questions about your training. What type of training did you have to complete in order to be a forensic DNA biologist?
In order to be a biologist, specifically a forensic examiner, I had to have a certain educational background with specific courses in molecular biology and genetics, for instance. I got my undergraduate degree from the University of Delaware in animal science with minors in biology and chemistry in 2001. And then I went on to receive my master's degree in criminal justice, specializing in forensic science in 2004 from Michigan State University. Specifically for work at the FBI, we have an extensive training program. It took just over about 2.5 years. And that included a series of written and oral practical exercises, oral examinations, and a series of moot courts to ensure that not only do I understand the fundamental science of our testing, but also that I could clearly and correctly express that science.
Do you undergo any ongoing training in the state-of-the-art of mitochondrial DNA testing?
Yes, we are required to seek out and participate in continuing education. I attend workshops, I review scientific literature, and various presentations. Also, we are required to complete what's called proficiency testing twice a year, and that is a test that evaluates my ability to complete my casework and to obtain the correct result given casework items.
You said that you review forensic articles. Have you ever published an article yourself?
I have. In 2009, I was co-author on a publication in the Journal of Forensic Sciences, and that just outlined the process of validating mitochondrial DNA casework for the state of Delaware Forensic Laboratory. And validation is just the process by which a technique or a group of techniques is evaluated to ensure that it can consistently produce reliable results, and what conditions need to be met in order for that to happen.
And that process you wrote about was subjected to peer review?
That is correct. Peer review is just a review by other experts in the field to ensure that the testing is valid.
Have you ever testified in court before and given your opinion regarding mitochondrial DNA testing?
Yes, I have.
How many times?
Once.
Have you testified, that one time you testified, was that in state court or federal court?
That was in Gwinnett County, Georgia.
So it was in state court?
Yes, sorry.
May I proceed, Your Honor?
Sir?
All right, let's talk about what DNA is. And I'm going to hand you a clicker here. The big button is forward and the little button is back.
Okay.
Okay? And if you click the forward button, all right. Then you can click the back button if you need to go back. All right, so you prepared a presentation to explain to the jury what DNA is. And so can you explain in layman's terms for the jury what is DNA?
Sure. DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid, and that's the material in our bodies that provides the instructions for our physical characteristics as well as how our bodies function. And if you see on the slide to the left, there is a diagram of what DNA looks like. We sometimes call this a twisted ladder, where the rungs of the ladder are formed by the 4 building blocks or bases of DNA. We refer to them as A, G, T, and C. And these bases pair together in a predictable manner such that if you know the order of the bases on one side of that ladder, you can determine the order on the opposite side. And this is important because the goal of our testing is to be able to isolate the DNA from an item and to determine that order of bases, which we refer to as the sequence. And that can vary between individuals. So DNA is found in the cell, and there are 2 different types of DNA. There's nuclear DNA, which is found in the nucleus of the cell, which is that big round circle on the left, and there's mitochondrial DNA. Now, there are various differences between the two. One of the primary differences is how it's passed on from parent to child. Nuclear DNA, as you see it says, comes from both parents. You get half from mom and half from dad. So you have 2 copies per cell. And that means it's individualizing. With the exception of identical twins, each person will have different nuclear DNA. Mitochondrial DNA, on the other hand, is passed on from only your mother. So, for example, my brothers and sisters and I all have the same mitochondrial DNA, which we received from my mother, who received it from her mother, and so on and so forth. However, only my sisters and I will pass that DNA on to our children. And this is what's termed maternal inheritance. This slide here is just giving more of an example of maternal inheritance. If you look at the top, the mother and father, each of these different colors represents a different mitochondrial DNA type. So at the top, the father has the white mitochondrial DNA type and the mother has blue. And you'll notice that all of their children, to include 2 daughters and 1 son, have the blue mitochondrial DNA type of their mother. But only the daughters pass on that blue mitochondrial DNA type to their children. The children of the son have the yellow mitochondrial DNA type of their mother.
And Ms. Fentress, there's actually a laser sitting up there. If the laser would assist you in pointing out the blue
So
characters.
yes, so this is the blue mitochondrial DNA type of the mother, and this slide is to represent the fact that all maternal relatives will have the same mitochondrial DNA type. So you'll see the mother, and her 3 children all have the blue mitochondrial DNA type, and then her daughters passed on the blue mitochondrial DNA type to their children. So for processing mitochondrial DNA in the laboratory, when an item of evidence is received, the first thing we need to do is take a small portion of that item. So for example, if it's a hair, we would take a cutting of the hair if it's large enough, or for what we call a reference, like a cheek swab or a blood reference, we would take a small cutting of a swab. And the first step in that is extraction, where we're isolating the DNA from the other parts of the cell. Once we do that, we need to expose that DNA to the process of amplification, where millions of copies of specific regions of the DNA are made for the next step, where we determine that order of A's, G's, C's, and T's, which we call sequencing. And that is where the item of evidence or the reference item is processed to determine what that mitochondrial DNA profile is from the DNA that was recovered. Now, once sequencing is completed, the final step is to do what's called a sequence comparison. And that is where the DNA recovered from an unknown item, such as a hair, would be compared to the DNA recovered from a reference item, such as a cheek swab. This gives you an example of two of the conclusions I can come to with that comparison. If you look at the top, If you look at the top at case 1, you'll see there's an evidence sequence and a reference sequence. Keep in mind that when I'm doing my actual analysis, I'm looking at hundreds of letters, not just a small segment like this. In the top case, you'll see there are letters that are highlighted in red. For the evidence item, for example, in the first position, there's a T, and for the reference, there's a C. And then if you look at the second position, for the evidence item, there's a G, and for the reference item, there's an A. Because there are at least 2 differences between those sequences, I can say that I can exclude that reference from being a source of the DNA in the unknown item of evidence.
So, Ms. Fentress, let me ask you a question about
Sure.
this slide. When you use the term reference and you use the term evidence, does the term reference apply to a known sample of DNA?
That is correct, yes.
So, for example, something that was recovered under controlled conditions, such as a buccal swab or a hair pull, that might be a reference sample.
That's correct. So if someone came to me and took my cheek swab, that would be my buccal reference.
And then the term evidence applies to something that's unknown, that might have been found at a crime scene.
That is correct, yes.
How come when you show us the sequence comparison, why don't we see the word match up here?
Well, as I'll explain when I talk about case 2, when I have a cannot exclude, I'm saying that the order of letters is the same between the two. However, with mitochondrial DNA testing, you cannot make an identification to the exclusion of all others, since all maternal relatives will share the same mitochondrial DNA type, and for some more common types, unrelated individuals could share the same mitochondrial DNA type. So we don't generally use that term.
And I interrupted your presentation, so please proceed.
Okay, so if you look at the bottom example, which is case 2, you'll see that there are no letters highlighted in red. And that is because all of the letters between the two are the same. Again, that means that I would come to a conclusion of cannot exclude, and that means that means that the individual that provided the reference or anyone in their maternal line could have been the source of the DNA that was recovered from the evidence item. And that completes my
That's the final
presentation.
slide. Okay. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
All right, Ms. Fentress, and did you have an opportunity to conduct some mitochondrial DNA testing on items submitted to you from the Lee County Sheriff's Office in your FBI case ID number 95A HQ 6527983?
Yes, I did.
All right. And I'll go ahead and turn your attention specifically to an item you labeled, or that the FBI labeled as item 32.1 or 32-1. Do you know what that item was?
Yes, I do. And Your Honor, may I refer to my notes?
If it'll refresh your recollection, you can look at them if needed.
Thank you.
And just to be sure, it's did the FBI recover an item identified by the FBI as 32-1?
Yes.
And right now, do you have a recollection of what that item is?
Yes, I do. That was a hair that was recovered from coveralls.
Okay. And I'm going to show you what's been previously entered into evidence as State's Exhibit 94. It's a composite exhibit containing multiple items. I'm going to ask you to examine number 94 and determine whether or not the container that contained 32-1 is within.
Yes, it is. I'm looking at the container right here, and I know it is the container because it has our laboratory number on there and item 32-1, as well as the initials of the biologist who collected or who examined that item.
And so did you have an opportunity to conduct a forensic examination of item 32-1?
Yes, I coordinated the laboratory processing for item 32-1, and I had the opportunity to interpret the data that was produced.
And also, did you receive, we got multiple exhibit numbers, so for the record, State's Exhibit number 58D, David, which contains an FBI evidence label, item 45. Do you recall what that is?
I recall that item 45 was a buccal sample obtained from Jimmy Rodgers.
And if we go back to your slide, the buccal sample would be your reference sample, right?
That is correct.
And can you explain to the jury now, did you have an opportunity to process item 45, FBI item 45, which is State's Exhibit 58D, and compare that to FBI item 32-1?
Yes, I did complete an interpretation of the data from item 45. Again, that's the reference from Jimmy Rodgers. And I did a comparison of the profile obtained from the item 32-1 hair to the profile obtained from the reference from Jimmy Rodgers.
And what were the results of your analysis?
The results were that the sequence obtained from the item 32-1 hair and from Rodgers were the same in the range obtained that was consistent between both of them, and that it was a cannot exclude, meaning that that Rodgers could not have been excluded as the source of the item 32-1 hair.
So getting back to your chart of blue people, yellow people, and red people, your testing concluded that Mr. Rodgers or another blue person descended from his mother left that hair.
Yes, that Mr. Rodgers or anyone in his maternal line could have been the source of that hair.
Did you consult with a population database regarding your findings?
Yes, and what counsel is referring to is when I have a conclusion of cannot exclude, again, meaning that that individual could have been the source of the evidence item, I need to give some kind of meaning to that conclusion. And in order to do that, the sequence that is obtained needs to be searched in what's called the mitochondrial DNA population database. And that's a collection of known samples from anonymous individuals of a number of different population groups. And within each of those population groups, a profile can be more or less common. So we search the sequence in the database to see how many times it's been seen in each of those population groups. And based on that, I generate a statistic that gives the maximum percentage of individuals that would be expected to share that sequence in the general population.
And after you consulted with a database, did you come up with a frequency estimate of how many times that profile would be, how many times you'd find that profile within the population?
Yes, and that estimate was expressed for the three major population groups for the United States, African American, U.S. Caucasian, and U.S. Hispanic. And in each of those, the sequence was observed 0 times. For the African American population groups, that means that no more than 0.12%, or less than 0.25% of individuals would be expected to share that sequence. For the Caucasian group, it was no more than 0.11% of individuals. And for U.S. Hispanics, it was also no more than 0.12% of individuals that would be expected to share that profile.
All right, can you explain, for those of us who aren't good at math, can you relate this in terms that those of us who might be more familiar with whole numbers can understand?
So for the two that were the African American and the U.S. Hispanic, that would be about 1 in 800 individuals would be expected to share that profile. And for the U.S. Caucasian, it would be about 1 in 900 individuals who would be expected to share that profile.
And during your forensic examination of items for DNA, actually, let me back up. Did you also receive some other items that are in that bag there, specifically items 9-2, 12-1, 12-3, 28-2, 32-2, and 32-3?
Yes, I did. Those were all also hairs. The 9-1 hair was recovered from the vacuumings from the left front the left front seat and floor. The 12-1 and 12-3 hairs were recovered from the right rear seat and floor. The 28-2 hair was documented as being recovered from the right foot of Teresa Sievers. And the 32-2 and 32-3 hairs were also recovered from the coveralls.
And you also, in addition to the reference sample from Jimmy Rodgers, you also had reference samples from T. Sievers, M. Sievers, C. Wright. So yes, T. Sievers, M. Sievers, C. Wright, and Mr. Rodgers?
That is correct.
And did you have an opportunity to compare those additional items, the 9-2, 12.1, 12.3, 28.2, 32.2, and 32.3, to the other reference samples?
Yes, I compared 9-2, 12-1, 12-3, 28-2, 32-2, and 32-3 to all of the references that I obtained.
And what were your conclusions regarding those items?
Regarding those items, all of the references to include Teresa Sievers, Mark Sievers, Curtis Wright Jr., and Jimmy Rodgers were all excluded as sources of the DNA obtained from those hairs, which means they could not have been the source of the DNA obtained from those hairs.
Okay. And then during your testing process, does the process, I think there's a term sometimes folks in labs use, does the process make babies?
Can you clarify?
Do you sometimes end up with other reference items that are created during your testing process? And I'm specifically referring to FBI exhibit number 46, item 46.
Oh, yes. Counsel is referring to what we call secondary evidence. So in that process where we're isolating the DNA, we create tubes, which we call extraction tubes. And those are our secondary evidence, and we maintain those tubes and return them with the evidence.
All right, I'm going to show you what's been previously marked as State's Exhibit number 95. These are the extracts. And ask if you recognize number 95.
Yes, I recognize this. It is in our FBI envelope, and it has the lab number, our FBI lab number, as well as the evidence item 46 and DNA extract secondary. Item 46 is a secondary from the items that I tested.
This time, Your Honor, the state would admit what's been previously marked as State's Exhibit number 95 and evidence the State's 95.
We're sure admitted.
I'll take those. Thank you. Your Honor, we tender the witness.
Defense.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Make sure it's still morning. You had testified when it comes to mitochondrial DNA that it's strictly from the mother or on the maternal side passed on to the women to then pass on. Is that correct?
That's close. It's passed on to all of the mother's children, but only the daughters, the females, will pass it on to their children. So that's how it remains in the maternal line.
Okay. And were you given any information on either Teresa Sievers and her maternal line going up a generation or down a generation?
No, I only received the reference from Teresa Sievers.
And did you receive anything in your samples regarding a Taylor Schumacher?
No, I do not recall that name.
So nothing on Ms. Schumacher, nor up a generation, down a generation to her daughters, anything like that?
No.
And when you say that all of the samples that you had were all excluded, is that correct?
All of the hairs that I had, with the exception of 32-1, excluded all of the references that I received.
Okay. 32-1 being?
32-1 was the hair recovered from the coveralls.
So you cannot make an identification to the exclusion of all others, whether related or unrelated, is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Would you expect to find DNA or mitochondrial DNA as a result of transfer or placement? So I'll stick with transfer.
When speaking of hairs, I wouldn't expect that. When we process our hairs, we actually wash the hair through a series of washes to ensure that the information that we are obtaining is coming specifically from the hair itself. So generally what we receive is going to be the DNA that was recovered from the actual hair.
Okay. Just have a moment.
Yes, ma'am.
Would it be fair to say that people living in the same house or utilizing the same cars or airplanes, that a transfer could happen in that manner?
Can you clarify what you mean by a transfer?
Of hair.
Yes, that would be fair to say.
So it's, I don't have any other questions. Thank you.
State.
Briefly, Ron. Ms. Fentress, at the beginning of your presentation, you talked about the nuclear testing versus the mitochondrial testing. Why did you do mitochondrial DNA testing on that hair at item 32-1?
The reason mitochondrial DNA testing would have been done on the hair is because, if you recall, I said nuclear DNA is found in much lower amounts than mitochondrial DNA. Also, when you're talking about hairs, generally we are only able to recover or detect nuclear DNA in the root of the hair. That's the part that anchors the hair to your head. So when we just have a portion of the shaft or the shaft of the hair, mitochondrial DNA testing is the only option. And in this case, it was only a portion of the hair. It was not the root.
And what happened to the hair? What happened to that hair when you did the testing?
When we do the testing, we have to take a portion of the hair. In this case, this hair was about 2 millimeters, which is about the width of a nickel. So we had to consume the hair, meaning we had to use it entirely for our testing.
Thank you.
No other questions?
This witness to be released or retained.
Your Honor, she's free to go.
No objection.
No objection.
Free to go. ma'am.
Okay.
Thank you. Next witness.
State calls David Lebid.
Can I have both sides approach while that witness is coming in? Okay.
All right, yes, Lebid.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
And you?
Thank you.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Can you please state your full name for the record?
David Michael Lebid.
And can you please spell your last name for the court reporter?
L-E, B as in boy, I, D as in David.
And where are you employed?
Lee County Sheriff's Office.
And in what capacity are you employed there?
I'm currently a lieutenant in their homicide unit.
How long have you been a Lee County Sheriff's Deputy?
Almost 12 years.
And did you have any law enforcement experience prior to that?
Yes, I did.
And how much law enforcement experience did you have prior to that 12 years?
Approximately 3.5 years at the City of Fort Myers Police Department.
So in total, about 15 years in law enforcement?
Yes, sir.
Lieutenant, were you involved in the investigation involving the death of Teresa Sievers back in June of 2015?
Yes.
And what was your involvement in what was your role rather in the investigation?
I was one of the supervisors assigned to the case to kind of monitor the progress.
Were you a lieutenant there then as well?
No.
And what was your rank then?
Sergeant.
And a sergeant is a lower rank than a lieutenant?
Yes.
As a sergeant, do you typically work a little closer with investigations than you do as a lieutenant?
Yes.
As a lieutenant, you supervise more people?
Absolutely.
When did you become involved in the investigation of the death of Dr. Sievers?
Approximately June 30th.
And we understand that for some time the investigation continued with very little leads.
Yes.
At some point, did you get a break in the case?
Yes.
Where did that break come from?
Around July 9th, 2015, we received a phone call from a law enforcement officer in, I believe it was the state of Illinois.
And that officer provided a lead to you?
Yes.
Did you then get an opportunity to go investigate that lead?
Yes.
And where did you go to investigate that lead?
We flew into Missouri and then drove over to the state of Illinois.
And who was it in Illinois that you needed to speak with?
The name of the primary witness is what you're asking me?
Yes.
Rose Grunert.
What was the last name?
Grunert, I think that's how it's pronounced, Grunert. You're welcome.
And after speaking with Ms. Gruner, did you then leave Illinois and come back to Florida?
No.
Where did you go after speaking with Ms. Gruner?
We went over to Jefferson County, Missouri.
And what was the purpose of going to Jefferson County, Missouri?
To follow up on a lead that was provided by Ms. Grunert.
And was there a specific person or persons that you needed to speak with in Jefferson County?
Yes.
Who?
Curtis Wayne Wright.
And let's talk about Mr. Wright now. Were you able to locate Mr. Wright?
Yes.
Where did you locate him?
I believe the name of the city is Hillsboro. Hillsboro.
And that's in Jefferson County?
Yes, it is.
Did you locate him at home, work, or somewhere else?
At his residence.
When you located him at his residence, was he alone or was he with someone else?
He had two other people with him.
Okay. Who was there?
His spouse, Angela Wright, and I cannot remember the name of her. It was a small male child.
So it was Mr. Wright, Mrs. Wright, and a child?
Yes.
And did you have an opportunity to speak with Mr. Wright about whether or not he knew Dr. Sievers and Mark Sievers?
Yes, I did.
Objection, Your Honor. Overruled.
And were you able to learn from him whether or not he had been to Florida recently? Or recently, as you know, recently as in July, had he been to Florida recently?
Yes.
Overruled. Judge, can we approach?
Sure.
Okay, were you able to learn from Mr. Wright whether he had recently been to Florida?
Yes.
And whether or not he knew Dr. Sievers or Mark Sievers?
Yes.
Did he actually know them?
Yes, he did.
So, did Mr. Wright become a subject of your investigation into the death of Dr. Sievers?
Yes, he did.
What were the next investigative steps that you took regarding Mr. Wright?
Well, on this specific day in question that I spoke with him earlier that morning, we served a search warrant on his residence. I also obtained a search warrant to get a DNA standard for Mr. Wright. And following that, we began to examine his timeline for the weekend in question concerning the murder of Dr. Teresa Sievers, as well as all associates of Mr. Wright. And eventually, we also obtained a search warrant for Mr. Wright's cell phone records. His actual cell phone was contained within the residence during that initial search warrant. That phone was seized during that search warrant and sent back to Lee County to have an analysis done on the phone to examine the data contained within so we could further build our timeline of events to understand what happened.
Okay. So when you said cell phone records and then you said cell phone download, are those the same thing or are they different things?
Those are two different things.
And did you also have an opportunity to determine Mrs. Wright's cell phone number as well?
Yes.
Let me start first with Mr. Wright. What was his cell phone number that you obtained?
May I please refer to my notes here?
That will refresh your recollection.
Yes, it will. Can you ask the question again, please?
What was Mr. Wright's cell phone number?
Mr. Wright's cell phone number was area code 314-996-9581.
And what was Mrs. Wright's cell phone number?
Mrs. Wright's cell phone number was area code 314-677-7311.
And when you obtain cell phone records and cell phone downloads, do you often have an opportunity to examine or have examined those records for interrelationships between numbers?
Yes.
So, for example, if the two of us, you and I, Hunter and Lebid, were subjects involved in an investigation, you might want to see if the two of us were calling each other during the investigation.
Yes.
Did you also have an opportunity to obtain Mark Sievers' cell phone number?
Yes.
And what was his cell number?
Area code 314-239-0173.
Okay. And so, as the sergeant in charge of the investigation, did you have analysis done on Mr. Wright's cell phone records and as well as his cell phone dump?
Yes.
And as a result of that analysis, did you develop another suspect from those records?
Yes.
Who?
Jimmy Ray Rodgers.
Was his phone number in Mr. Wright's cell phone records?
Yes.
What was his phone number?
Area code 573-864-1179.
Well, at this time I would offer into evidence self-authenticated documents. The first one is State's Exhibit number 75, AT&T phone records for phone number 314-996-9581. I showed them to counsel yesterday as a self-authenticating document. I'll just offer them all, and I guess at this time I'll just offer them all at the same
Once
time.
you list each one
Yes.
by number and identify.
I'll also, the first one I offered again was number 75, 314-996-9581. The next one we'll offer is 314-677-7311. That's State's Exhibit number 91.
One.
314, yeah, 677-7311. 7311. The next one we'll offer is 314-239-0173 at State's Exhibit number 8080. The next one we will offer is 573-864-1179 at State's Exhibit number 77. And I have some others here that we haven't yet talked about, but I can offer them now and perhaps save some time. I also have a certified document from Enterprise LLC. That's a State's Exhibit number 90. Another certified document from AT&T for the tower in Chapel Hill at State's Exhibit number 81. AT&T tower at Jarvis Road at State's Exhibit number 82.
It's all of them?
From this witness, yes, Your Honor.
Okay, both sides can approach.
We'll show them in a minute.
And for the record, we've got 314-239-0173, 314-677-7311, 314-996-9581, and 573-864-1179. Sorry, I didn't read off the exhibit numbers again when I read off the phone numbers. I apologize. Okay. So, Lieutenant, you and the other sheriff's deputies under your supervision now are examining phone records and determining the interrelationships between Mark Sievers, Angela Wright, Curtis Wainwright, and Jimmy Rodgers?
Yes.
And when you served that search warrant at Mr. Wright's house, was there a vehicle located there?
Yes.
Specifically, and I'll ask broadly, was there a Hyundai Elantra at the residence?
There was different vehicles in this case, so I'm going to refer to my notes just to get you the make and model real quick.
That will refresh your recollection, you may do so.
Thank you. Hyundai Elantra, yes.
And now the narrower question was, what color was that Elantra?
Silver.
Silver. There was a silver Elantra at Mr. Wright's residence. And within that silver Elantra, well, let me ask you this next question. Did the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office provide assistance to you with this investigation within Jefferson County?
Yes, they did.
And during the investigation at Mr. Wright's home, did you recover a Garmin GPS unit from within the silver Elantra?
Eventually, when we performed a search warrant on the silver Elantra, there was a Garmin GPS located within that vehicle.
So you did a separate search warrant on the Elantra by itself?
Yes.
And did that Garmin also get transmitted to the Sheriff's Office, Lee County Sheriff's Office, for testing?
Yes, it did.
Now, when you recovered items in the investigation in Jefferson County, Missouri, or anywhere else in Missouri, how did you get that stuff back to Lee County for examination?
With the assistance of the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office to maintain proper chain of custody, we were assigned one of their investigators who was also their evidence technician as well as their crime scene technician. They participated and they facilitated that process so it was properly documented.
And so, for example, you told us earlier that you recovered Mr. Wright's phone during a search warrant. And at some point, did that phone get examined at the Digital Forensics Unit here in Fort Myers?
Yes.
And how did that phone get from Missouri down here to Fort Myers?
After meeting with the evidence technician from Jefferson County Sheriff's Office, they documented through a property receipt how that specific item as well as other items were signed over to our custody, but they were already securely encased in some kind of protection with evidence tape to show that it was not opened and touched in any way. From there, we would use FedEx to ship those evidence items directly to the Lee County Sheriff's Office so that they could document receiving it properly on a property receipt and then how they would enter each item for examination.
And so the items were sealed up so that you could be sure that somehow it didn't get opened while being transported by FedEx.
Correct.
So if there's a silver Elantra at Mr. Wright's house, why was Captain Long and crime scene technician Rose sent to Arizona to get a white Elantra?
We learned through our investigation, primarily the biggest clue was when I interviewed Angela Wright, that the silver Elantra was a rental vehicle. However,
The statement is not being offered for its truth. He's explaining why.
Overruled.
we learned that before they rented this silver Hyundai Elantra, there was a white one that was rented before that due to a vehicle crash. So we knew that we wanted to find that vehicle also.
Okay. And at this time, we'll offer as a self-authenticating document where did I put it? State's Exhibit number 90, certified documents from Enterprise. We would offer this document as a self-authenticating record, John.
Show it admitted.
Just reviewing for the rest.
Noted.
I'm going to actually show this one to you, Lieutenant Lebid. So did you then have an opportunity to investigate, check the, try to locate where this other Elantra had been rented from?
Yes,
And did you determine where?
it was determined that it was rented through, I believe it was Mertz Auto Body. They facilitated the rental because they were the organization that was responsible for repairing the vehicle that was crashed.
Okay, so sometimes when your car needs repair, the place where you take your car to be repaired sometimes can get you a deal on a rent-a-car.
Yes,
Is that what happened with Mertz Auto Body?
that's what we were told by Angela Wright.
And so did the Wrights actually have a personal vehicle that was at Mertz Auto Body?
Yes.
Okay. And after talking to Mertz Auto Body, and did you find out from them what agency they used to rent the car?
Yes,
And specifically the white Elantra?
specifically the white Elantra.
And did you go, and then which agency was it?
Enterprise?
And were you able to contact Enterprise and find out where that white Elantra was, the one that had been rented previously by the Wright family?
Eventually, yes.
Where was it located?
Arizona.
And that's why you sent Long and Rose out to Arizona to get it?
Yes.
And certainly the car wasn't driven to Arizona by Mr. Wright or anybody in this case, right?
Not that we learned.
It was re-rented and then driven out there at some point?
Yes.
Did you have an opportunity to examine, obtain the records from Enterprise and determine how many miles the car had been driven during the rental period?
We did.
And the amount of miles that the car was driven, do you recall how many?
Based on the document in front of me, I can tell you what it says.
Okay.
2,703.
So 2,703 miles between what dates?
Between the dates of June 24th, 2015 from approximately 4:42 p.m. with a date and time in showing June 30th, 2015 with the time of 4:34 p.m.
So in the space of 5 or 6 days, somebody drove the car 2,700 miles.
Yes, sir.
How long of a drive is it from Jefferson County, Missouri to Fort Myers? Did you check the mileage to drive? In fact, have you driven from Jefferson County, Missouri to Fort Myers?
Your objection's overruled if he knows the answer.
I have before.
How many miles is that, approximately?
I'm going to have a hard time with that. I can tell you the time it takes, but it's pretty high amount.
Is it less than 2,700 miles?
It is, but not by much.
Overruled.
And when you say not by much, you mean by going back and forth?
Correct.
How long did it take you to drive from Jefferson County to Fort Myers?
One way took approximately 17 to 18 hours.
Now, did you also have an opportunity to conduct a neighborhood canvass in the vicinity of Curtis Wright's home?
Yes.
What was the purpose of conducting a neighborhood canvass?
Through the course of the investigation and trying to establish the timeline of events, we tried to determine independent sources within Mr. Wright's neighborhood that could say when they would see their neighbor, how often they would see their neighbor, and then after we got a general idea of activity in a neighborhood, we asked about specific dates of interest in relation to the crime we were investigating.
And did anybody in the neighborhood talk to you?
No.
Did you ask them to talk to you and ask for help?
We did.
While visiting with the neighbors in Mr. Wright's neighborhood, did you note any cell phone towers?
Yes.
All right. And if I could ask Madam Clerk's assistance with State's Exhibit number 33B, I believe. B, bravo. All right. I'm going to show you State's Exhibit number 33A. It's previously been admitted. Actually, I can put it up on the thing there. That would be easier. What number is it? 33A. what's in 33A?
Right there, what I'm pointing to, the laser pointer, the cell tower,
Sorry, go ahead. I'm sorry.
was appeared to be a cell tower to us, so that became of interest.
And this photograph was taken outside the residence of Curtis Wainwright.
Yes,
And as a result of seeing that cell tower there, you had his records. You still wanted to get records from the towers?
yes,
And so did you then request what's, I guess, commonly called a cell phone tower dump?
yes.
What's a tower dump? What is that?
My understanding is that when we use our phones will connect to the closest towers that are able to facilitate the phone calls, and depending on what's going on, it may move to another tower. So tower dumps are useful to us because it shows which phone number is connected to that specific tower, so it can help us focus on locations of interest.
And so since there was a tower right next to Mr. Wright's home, was that the obvious tower to ask for?
Objection, Your Honor.
Overruled.
Yes,
Now, did you also request for cell phone towers? Let me ask this question. Was there a cell phone tower near the Sievers home here in Fort Myers?
yes,
And did you also ask for a tower dump from that tower?
yes,
Your Honor, this time the state would admit the previously proffered as State's Exhibit number 82, AT&T tower dump from Jarvis Road, and State's Exhibit number 81, AT&T tower dump from Chapel Hill Road, Missouri.
Just renewing my objections, Judge.
Objections are noted for the record. Overruled. Will show them admitted.
And now it's just safe to say there's a lot of information contained within not just a cell phone record, but also in a tower dump.
yes,
Is that something you were able to analyze on your own?
no,
Now you had a teammate or a partner who was also with you in Missouri during this investigation, right?
yes,
Is that something the two of you can do on your own?
no,
And so did you ask for assistance with the analytical part of going through the tower dumps and the cell phone records in this case?
yes, we did.
Do you have analysts at the sheriff's office that you often are able to assign those tasks to?
Yes, we do.
Which analysts did you ask for assistance from?
Myra Simmons and Suzanne Buchhofer.
Okay. And did they then do the analytical part of figuring out what's in the records, who's in the records, and so on?
Yes, they did.
Okay, so you told us earlier that Mr. Rodgers was in Mr. Wright's cell phone records. Did you then have an opportunity to talk to Mr. Rodgers?
We did.
Was he in the Jefferson County, Missouri vicinity as well?
I'm sorry.
Objection.
Question again.
I asked if he was in the Jefferson County, Missouri vicinity as well. Was that the objection?
Withdrawn, I'm sorry.
I also asked if he had had a chance to speak with Mr. Rodgers. I don't know which one we were objecting to.
Whether or not he had spoken to Mr. Rodgers.
Overruled.
Okay. So was Mr. Rodgers in the Jefferson County, Missouri vicinity as well?
Yes.
And did you have an opportunity to actually make contact with Mr. Rodgers?
Yes.
How did you do that?
We went to where we believed he lived.
And when you got to where you believed he lived, who was there?
His girlfriend at the time,
And what's her name?
Taylor Showmaker.
And so Ms. Showmaker was present, but Mr. Rodgers was not.
Correct.
Did you have to leave and come back at another time to speak with Mr. Rodgers?
No, he eventually returned during our time there.
And how many members of law enforcement participated in that initial visit to Mr. Rodgers?
2.
Who?
Lieutenant Mike Downs and myself.
You didn't take a SWAT team with you?
No.
Or a tactical team?
No.
And what was the purpose of that initial visit with Mr. Rodgers, specifically with Mr. Rodgers?
Mr. Rodgers was located in the timeline of Curtis Wainwright's cell phone download in close proximity to the date of the crime that we were investigating. And it's common practice to speak with everybody that's within a close timeline of events that we're trying to follow up on.
So you said that Mr. Rodgers wasn't present when you initially arrived, but you didn't have to leave and come back. So does that mean that at some point he arrived?
After a short time of us being there, Jimmy showed up.
And when you say Jimmy, are you referring to Jimmy Ray Rodgers?
Yes, I am.
The person you refer to as Jimmy, is he present in court today?
Yes, he is.
Can you please point to him and identify him by an article of clothing he's wearing?
Mr. Rodgers is right there where I'm pointing. He has a suit coat on. He has a multicolored tie, white collared shirt. He's got black rimmed glasses on.
Can you tell what color tie he's wearing?
I'm not sure. It's kind of silverish from where I'm sitting.
Okay. You can see Ms. Fitzgeorge next to me.
Yes,
How many people over?
2 over.
All right. May the record reflect that the witness has identified the defendant.
We'll let the record so reflect.
How did Mr. Rodgers act when he arrived?
Kind of frantic.
How did he arrive? Did he arrive by vehicle or did he arrive on foot?
By vehicle.
Though he appeared frantic, was he cooperative?
To the point of acknowledging our presence and having a semi-polite conversation, yes.
Did you have an opportunity to speak with Mr. Rodgers?
We did.
And did you in fact speak with him?
We did.
Were you able to make a recording of that discussion?
No.
Why not?
He refused to provide a sworn taped statement.
Did he in fact talk to you?
He did.
Your Honor.
Overruled.
Your Honor, may we approach?
Yes, sir.
Ready. We're going to go ahead and break for lunch. This witness will be a good bit longer, I believe, and it's already past noon. So I'm going to ask you not to talk about the case among yourselves with anybody else or look up any of the people or places involved, and we'll see you again at 1:30.
Proffer the testimony for the record and make a record of what the testimony is for the court's consideration.
Sure.
Okay. Really?
I think his only objection is the fact that he refused to give a sworn statement. I don't know if it's about anything that he actually said to your witness.
It's probably best practice to just go ahead and make the record right now while I can.
Go ahead.
Lieutenant Lebid, you told us that Mr. Rodgers refused to provide a sworn statement. Did he actually, however, agree to speak with you?
For a short time, yes.
And was he placed in custody?
No.
Was his movement restrained in any way?
No.
And this happened at his home and not at the sheriff's office?
Correct.
Was he placed inside of a police vehicle of any kind?
No.
Was he handcuffed?
No.
And at this point, when he made the statement, was it just you and Downs present at his home, or had anybody else arrived?
Just Downs and myself present at his home.
And was Ms. Schomacher still present?
She was.
And so Mr. Rodgers agreed to speak but would not go on tape.
Correct.
And did you get an opportunity to ask Mr. Rodgers about the Sievers family and whether or not he had been to Florida?
Not about the Sievers family, but about whether or not he'd been to Florida.
And what specifically did you ask him?
I asked him, have you been to Florida recently?
And what did he tell you?
No.
He didn't tell you he'd been down celebrating a graduation?
No.
Did you get to ask him about Mark Sievers at all?
No.
Did you get to ask him about Teresa Sievers?
No.
After he told you he hadn't been to Florida, what else did you discuss with him?
I asked if he knew Curtis Wainwright because they said your number appeared in his phone records.
And did he admit to knowing Mr. Wright?
Yes.
And what else did you discuss with Mr. Rodgers?
I asked him, have you talked to him recently because your number's in his phone?
And what did he tell you?
I don't talk to him often.
And was there any further discussion after he said he doesn't talk to Mr. Wright often?
No, he declined to speak with us further.
And after your conversation was finished, was Mr. Rodgers taken into custody, or did you just leave?
We just left.
And when you left him there at home?
Yes.
Okay, that's our proffer.
Okay.
Unrelated.
Unrelated issue.
Unrelated to the testimony, I was going to ask that during the break, that neither counsel for the state nor the defense be allowed to talk to
Well,
the
that's-
witness during his testimony.
That's standard practice. I would assume that was happening irregardless.
Thank you.
Well, Judge, my understanding is we can talk to the witness, we just can't talk about their testimony.
That's true.
That's true.
It's just what counsel was getting at,
Yes.
I assumed.
Yes, you are correct.
Okay. We'll see everybody at, what did I say, 1:30?
Yes, sir.
1:30.
Thank you.